Welcome to the next part of becoming an amateur racing driver. Today's episode is when it starts to get serious. This is what happens when you take your ARDS racing license test here in the UK. For any driver who wants to get into motorsport, this is a big day, as it will decide whether or not you have the necessary license you need to go racing. The ARDS test is, simply put, a test that examines your skill level of flags and an understanding of racing rules and circuit situations, as well as a practical exam which ensures you can follow the rules of the racetrack and show a level of competency out on circuit. Before your ARDS test, I would advise you go and take your medical, as it allows the ARDS test to be the final step in the journey before you submit the paperwork and officially become a racing driver. Once again, you can get your medical done at your GP or at a number of race circuits around the country. Be sure to check out their websites for more information on this type of event. Before we get to the day itself, I'm going to run through a couple of things I think you should be doing beforehand. First of which, I think you need to fill out your license application form. Technically you could do this afterwards, but you don't want to rush it and you don't want to be making any mistakes, as it's important that all of the information and details on this form are 100% correct. In your Go Racing starter pack, you'll have a lot of information to go through before your test. It might look quite daunting, but it's very important you go through this and be meticulous, as it defines whether you'll pass your ARDS racing license test. Now, this is cliche to say, but try not to be nervous. The majority of people who are dedicated enough and want to go racing will generally have what it takes to pass this test first time, no problems whatsoever. Now, I've been told by a few people who have been very experienced in the world of motorsport that if you do fail your ARDS test, then it will be deservingly so, because they'll have seen something on your test, whether that be in the written or practical exam, deserving of not being allowed to pass and go on a racetrack. So it would have been quite bad. Also, it does go without saying, but get there on time and give yourself a little bit of time to understand and take in the moment, because it's an occasion that you'll look back on hopefully with fond memories, so you want to be able to remember it for the right reasons, not because you're worrying constantly, a little bit like myself. At the end of the day, you're going to be driving around a racetrack, so why not enjoy it? Now, after you have arrived, all you're going to be basically doing is filling out a typical track day form, basically saying you understand all of the risks of motorsport, and then after that you'll probably have to wait around for a little bit while they get everything sorted, as typically these days are very busy, with a track day in itself going on with the ARDS test on the side as well. So the circuit staff will be quite busy, so do expect to be waiting around for a little bit of time. So possibly a little bit of last minute practice if you really need it. So once they're ready, you'll be taken off to do your written assessment. So you'll be going into a special assessment room, a bit like exams at school. It'll be completely silent once you're in there taking your test. But once you're sitting down and ready to start, the examiner at the front of the room will go through a basic couple of things that you should be watching out for, and then play the MSV DVD that you'd have probably seen in your welcome pack already. Now, yes, it might be fixed in your brain already what's going to be said in this video, but do listen once again, because you might hear something that's very important for your exam. As I said, the track day guys will kind of nudge you towards what you should be looking out for, because these questions or these answers may be needed in your assessment. So if they point out something to you beforehand, watch out for that especially, or listen out for it. It could be a little insight about what you're going to be opening up in your exam paper. So this test is divided up into a couple of sections. The first of which is about the race day flags. Now, if you watch motorsport on TV, you'll probably have come accustomed to all of these by now, so it shouldn't be too much of a worry, but do read the questions twice, because there is a difference between a stationary flag and a wave flag, so definitely be sure to read the question twice. On this flag section, you must score 100%, otherwise you will fail your exam there and then. The other part of the exam is all about general knowledge of the sport and the safety of it as well. So this one is multi-choice And from what I remember, you are given the option to get maybe 1 or 2 of these wrong and still pass. But of course, to be 100% sure, make sure you read the question and try and get it correct, because there are a couple of trick ones in there which, well, you could get caught out on quite easily. Some of them, however, are just sort of common sense, because let's be honest, what are you going to be saying to this question? I think one of the ones in my test was, what do you do if your car has a jammed throttle? One of the 4 possibilities is jump out of the car. One of the other possibilities is switch off the car, put the car in neutral and come to a stop slowly. It's more common sense. There are normally 2 or 3 completely obscene answers and then 1 just normal one. So it should be pretty self-explanatory in this regard, but there are a couple of them, like we'll speak about in a second, they're a little bit closer. They could be one or the other if you're thinking about it just logically, but that's where the extra research and time beforehand comes in useful. From memory, one of those trick questions is, what starts the race if the light system fails? So first thoughts could be, oh, it's going to be the green flag, surely. That would make sense, but that's not the case. It's actually the national flag. And of course in the UK that is the Union Jack. The large majority of people shouldn't have a problem passing this section of the test. Some people obviously go in there and say it's completely easy, so they'd either have done a lot of practice or they're just trying to big themselves up to make themselves feel good. But yeah, do the practice. I mean, I can fully see if I didn't do any practice about this whatsoever, I probably wouldn't have passed, because let's be honest, there's little bits of information that you wouldn't know without reading the guidebook and listening to the DVD multiple times. So it is a bit of worrying waiting to see whether you have passed your test, but thankfully for the large majority that's not going to be an issue. To prove this point, and for the record, everyone in my class passed both parts of the exam, the written part. So after you've passed the written part of your test, you'll get called up individually to go and take your practical. So the car I was driving was a Peugeot 208 GTI, a nice little car, quite similar to the Abarth that I drive on the road. So it was good for me as this felt somewhat comfortable, as I was understanding of what the car would do in terms of power, round corners and similar sort of things. Now, my examiner for the practical part of the test was one of the UK's most well-known club racers who's done quite a lot of professional stuff in the past, and that is Will Arif, so a driver who knows his stuff, and he took me around the track for a number of laps beforehand to sort of show me what the car was capable of. Now, this was kind of surreal for me because, as I mentioned before, I'd never been on a track before as a passenger or a driver, so it was quite nice to be in the passenger seat as a really talented driver was sort of throwing it around the track. But once he came into the pits, it was time for me to get in the car and understand what I'm going to be doing. So the point of the practical test is to show that you are competent behind the wheel of a car and you can sort of adapt to the situations around you, because of course there is live track day traffic around you, so you can't be going insane out there. So you're not timed, you don't need to be pushing to 100%, but you will be failed if you drive too slowly or end up spinning. That's a complete fail straight away. I feel like a mistake I was doing was trying to sort of prove to myself that I was up to the task sort of straight away. Sort of within a couple of laps I felt like I was sort of starting to push it a bit more, and I didn't need to be doing that. I didn't need to sort of start to sort of find limits of the car in certain areas. At the end of the day, it was just sort of showing that I was competent behind the wheel. I didn't need to show that I was fast. So a lot of that was me trying to prove to myself that I sort of could do it, but I didn't need to do that there and then. So I probably pushed harder than I needed to early on, as I just really wanted to see what I could do. But after a reminder from Will, he sort of just said, outright speed is not important here. You can calm down a little bit here and all is going to be good, because obviously it's more of a worry if you end up spinning and then you fail your test there and then. After a number of consistent and somewhat fast laps, Will told me there and then that I'd passed, which was really nice. And then once we got back to the pit lane and sort of stopped and we sort of talked about it a bit more, he mentioned to me that it was quite a convincing pass, which was nice to hear. In a lot of ways, if I'd scraped it, I don't know whether I would have been too happy with myself after doing all of that practice beforehand, both on the written and also the practical with laps on the simulator. But That wasn't the case, all was good, and I was very happy to pass my test in the way I did. So after all that, I could go up and get all my paperwork sorted out, but it was really nice to hear from Will, and he gave me lots of really good tips along the way as well. So my best advice is to sort of push to about 70% well within your means. This definitely makes sure that you're fast enough to pass your test, but not fast enough to get yourself into a situation where you might spin or make a mistake which ends up making you go into the gravel, or even worse, hitting a car, something like that. So just push well within your limits and you should be absolutely fine. Also, something to mention is your instructor should be constantly giving you advice and information, and if you're unsure about anything, just don't be worried to ask them, because they're not going to fail you for asking a question. You should be proactive and be asking those questions and not waiting for them to be given to you. In this way, give you a bit more confidence and allow you to be not so worried when behind the wheel. Now personally, I was a little bit worried because, as you'd have seen in the footage, my ARDS test was done in the damp conditions. It was a bit of an added extra worry, considering of course I seem to worry about everything, but thankfully the car had road tyres on. They were very suited to the wet conditions, so it wasn't really much of an issue. But maybe something different could be said if it was pouring down with rain. Maybe I'd have felt a bit different then. Hopefully after this you'll be the proud owner of a National B racing licence here in the UK. All you need to do is make sure everything is correct on the form and send it off to the racing organisation here in the UK. All of that stuff will be on a pre-printed envelope, so then you'll receive your licence in a few weeks. All good. So it's a really good experience, and one that unfortunately for myself I might struggle to look back on in great memories because I was worrying so much. I think I needed someone to tell me beforehand that you're, just going to be alright. As long as you're logical in your approach, there's not going to be any issues whatsoever. Maybe if you can find a way to somewhat distract yourself beforehand and not worry so much, that might be a great asset, because I think most people will know as soon as they sit in the car whether they've passed the test or not, really. Because if you're really worrying, or whether you think you're going to be an absolute legend and fly through every corner, there may be the ways you could fail. If you're too timid or too aggressive, there are the ways you could fail this. But if you're just sort of normal in your approach and just try and take it all methodically, it's not going to be an issue whatsoever for you. But nonetheless, I hope this was a bit of an insight into what you should be expecting when you go and take your racing license test here in the UK. Of course, this is probably one of the most important steps to getting out on track. Of course, there's a lot of learning to do between passing your test and then getting out there and doing your first race, but that's all part of the experience. So thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this one, and the last few videos in this series will focus on the build up to your first motor race and what you may need to buy and do before taking part in it. So good luck. Hopefully see you in part 6 in a few days time. Thanks for watching as always. It's been Alex, I'm out of here. Goodbye.